Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. And yeah, as Erin said, I'm going to be talking about kind of the basics of EA. In her book, Strangers Drowning, author Larissa McFarquhar, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, writes that what do-gooders lack is not happiness, but innocence. They lack that happy blindness that allows most people, most of the time, to shut their minds to what is unbearable. Do-gooders have forced themselves to know and keep on knowing that everything they do affects other people, and that sometimes, though not always, their joy is purchased with other people's joy. Remembering that they can no longer continue to live ignoring the unbearable, they feel an intense urge to dedicate their lives to helping. So we live in a deeply flawed and injured world. Too many people are hurt and will be hurt by extreme poverty, factory farming, racial injustice, pandemics, see today, climate change, and countless other problems that endanger present and future generations. So, given the privileges and resources that most of us here have been given by virtue of factors outside of our control, like our country of birth, how can we make the most of the opportunities that we have to make the world a better place? So trying to answer that question is what got me interested in effective altruism 3 years ago. And effective altruism, it's a growing community and philosophy based on asking how can we do the most good, doing our best to figure out the answer to that question, and then acting accordingly. So one of the most important aspects of effective altruism is cause prioritization, the idea that we should be comparing different causes and interventions, figuring out how much good each of them brings about, and then focusing on the causes that do the most good. So at this point, you might be wondering, like, don't all causes deserve some support? But I think the emphasis here should be shifted. It's not causes that deserve support, it's people. And since some causes and interventions support people far more effectively than others, we need to prioritize those if we want to best support people. So, for example, try and guess which of these interventions here increased school attendance the most per dollar spent in rural Kenya. So these are all quite normal aid programs that are implemented by nonprofits. We have unconditional cash transfers to families, merit-based scholarships, informing parents about the benefits of education, deworming, which is treating a parasitic disease, and free school uniforms. So take a second to think about that. So researchers found that deworming and informing parents about the benefits of educations was 40 times or more cost effective than the other interventions. That's a massive difference. And if you look at the last one, informing parents about the benefits of education, it seems to be like 100 times better than free school uniforms. So part of what this shows is that it's very hard to determine what will or won't work if we just go with our gut, and why it's so important to use evidence and careful reasoning to decide what to work on and what to donate to. It also shows how some efforts to improve the world are just far more effective than others. And this is why supporting all causes equally is unfair. When we care about all people, we need to prioritize the most effective causes and interventions, those that are going to best support the people that we care about helping. Not because other causes aren't important, and they're not that they're not worth dedicating our lives to solving, but because our resources are limited, our time is limited, there's so much to do and so much to solve. And with each choice that we make, people, and potentially many people, are going to bear the costs of what we choose not to do with that time instead. So now that we see the reason for prioritizing between different causes, how can we compare between all the different causes and interventions that are out there? 3 factors that are often useful for comparing causes are scale, neglectedness, and solvability. So scale refers to the number of people affected by an issue and how severely they're affected. So consider climate change and ALS. Climate change is already killing many people, and it's likely to displace and kill millions by 2050. In contrast, ALS is expected to kill roughly 180,000 people by 2050. So even though ALS is very important, scale suggests that climate change is even more important. The next factor to consider is solvability or tractability. So what's the likelihood of success from working on a cause? How likely are we to solve that problem? So for example, fighting malaria is much more tractable than fighting lung cancer. Bed nets cost about $5 and treated with insecticide, that is often enough to protect people from contracting malaria, while it often takes lots of expensive scans and treatments to protect people from lung cancer. Similarly, it's likely that developing cost-competitive, tasty, and cruelty-free animal products like clean meat or Impossible burgers is a more tractable or solvable way to prevent animal cruelty than getting many people to switch to vegetarian or vegan diets. And lastly, the third factor that's helpful to consider is neglectedness. So how many resources, that's funding, careers, research, media coverage, how many resources are going into an issue? Highly neglected causes often have a lot more promising opportunities that are still untapped compared to causes that already have like a lot of attention on them. So for example here, consider the kind of broad range of human well-being in comparison to the well-being of other animals. So for example, for every human in the US, there are about 28 land animals raised and killed in factory farms every year. And they're subject to very cruel treatment over the course of their lives. But still, if you look at philanthropic funding, 97% of philanthropic funding goes towards human-centered causes. So it seems that animals are highly neglected when you're considering the scale here. And then even among the donations, the few donations that are going towards non-human animals, most of the money goes towards shelters for like cats and dogs. So farmed animals are vastly more neglected than both pet animals and humans, while they're mistreated on a much, much larger scale. And finally, one of the most important lessons I've learned from effective altruism is to expand my circle of compassion. By default, most of us care and spend most of our times thinking about ourselves, our family, our friends, and our local communities. But when we include all humans in our circle of caring, or our moral circle, as it's often called, many global issues affect many, many more people, much more severely, and are much more tractable. We might think similarly once we start considering the more than 1 trillion non-human animals on our planet, and then further, the many greater number of people and animals who are yet to come into existence. So it's for that reason that global poverty, animal welfare, and improving the long-term future are all such high priority causes within effective altruism. And now you'll be hearing about each of these areas from our 3 guest speakers. And Erin, you can start us off with our first guest speaker, and then we'll be coming back at the end to talk about how you can get more involved with effective altruism.
Thank you, Arushi. Awesome. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome Olivia Larsen, who's joining us from GiveWell, which is an organization that assesses the efficacy of high-impact charities, where she is a researcher and a philanthropy advisor. So Olivia, let me know if you can share your screen, and we'll continue the presentation from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I still cannot. I'm still on host disabled attendee screen sharing, unfortunately.
Sorry, you should be able to do so now.
Perfect. I think it'll work. Great. Can everyone see my screen? No,
Yep.
They can't, because my shared window needs to come to the front, maybe. Okay, here we go. How's this going?
Perfect.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm Olivia Larson. I'm GiveWell's philanthropy advisor, and I'm really excited to be talking to you all a little bit about global health in general and GiveWell's priorities within global health. And so to start with a little bit about GiveWell. GiveWell is a charity that evaluates other charities and tries to identify the most cost-effective giving opportunities in global health and development. And so we were founded by Holden Karnofsky and Ellie Hassenfeld when they were working at a hedge fund in New York City, and trying to spending all day thinking about how to maximize the returns on their firm's investment. They had some extra money to give away, and so they started thinking about how they could find the opportunities to really save and improve lives with the funds they had available. And they were shocked by how challenging it was to find actual information on how the money they could give could help people. They realized that looking for this type of impact information was a full-time job. So they quit their jobs in finance and started GiveWell. And a lot of charity rating sites already existed then and exist now. But the main way that GiveWell is different is that many of these charity rating sites try to review many charities at a relatively shallow level, giving you information about how the charity spends their money on, administrative expenses versus program expenses, and helping people avoid charities that might be scams or frauds. GiveWell, on the other hand, works to identify a very few number of charities that we think offer exceptional opportunities to truly transform the lives of others. And so kind of where somebody might go to Charity Navigator or Charity Watch to find out whether a charity they're thinking of donating to would be a good choice, people who come to GiveWell can find the charities that we think offer some of the best opportunities to do good in terms of saving and improving lives. And the way that we find this very small list of charities is by doing a lot of research. So we have about 15 researchers, and last year we think they spent over 20,000 hours researching charities. And we research charities by starting at the program level, looking for high quality, academic, peer-reviewed evidence about how impactful a particular program could be, like distributing malaria nets. Once we think that we have a strong understanding of how effective a particular program is, we start looking at cost effectiveness and creating detailed models to understand how much it costs to create the good outcome that we want to see. From there, we start looking for charities that implement that program and look for charity-specific evidence of effectiveness, such as how the charity targets, implements, and monitors the program. And importantly, we ask our charities what they would do with additional funds and really think at the margin to try to find the things that are truly that kind of additional funds can allow the charity to do more and do more good. And so the charities that we've identified based on this process save lives and improve lives. I'm not going to go through what each one of them does, but as some examples, the Against Malaria Foundation distributes long-lasting insecticide-treated mosquito nets to protect people from malaria. On the life-improving side, Give Directly gives one-time, unconditional cash transfers to very poor people, largely living in sub-Saharan Africa. This year, we reviewed over 100 charities and were able to add one new top charity to our list of recommendations, which is New Incentives. And New Incentives is a charity that offers conditional cash transfers to caregivers living in Northwest Nigeria, trying to encourage caregivers to take their children in to get immunized with kind of basic childhood vaccinations. We think that this is an incredibly cost-effective program and really effective at saving these children's lives because of the efficacy of vaccines. And so, as you may have mentioned, these charities that I've explained have all been working in low and lower middle income countries. And the reason that GiveWell's top charities work in lower income countries is because that's where we think that we can make a bigger impact, because that's where your dollar can go a lot further. So this is for a few reasons. Number one is that there are often high quality studies done in the field of development economics, and so that we can understand which programs can actually relate to the good that we want to do. Additionally, many of the cheapest and easiest to solve problems have already been addressed in rich countries. So an example is malaria. Malaria was eradicated from the United States in the American South in 1951, but remains endemic in many low-income countries. And so kind of in these low-income countries, as I mentioned, one of the things that we try to do is combat extreme poverty, which is very extreme. Even though we've made exceptional progress in the last 30 years on extreme poverty, there are still over 700 million people living on less than $1.90 a day. And that amount is already adjusted for price differences between countries. So it represents what living on less than $1.90 a day would be like in the United States. Even people living on more than $1.90 a day would still be considered very poor by American standards and have a lot of need that we can help with. Additionally, GiveWell works to kind of treat cheaply preventable diseases like malaria, as I mentioned. So even though malaria was eradicated in the American South, as I mentioned, in low and lower middle income countries, largely sub-Saharan Africa, hundreds of thousands of people, mostly children under 5, die every year from malaria. And one of GiveWell's top charities, Malaria Consortium, works to, multiple our charities work to address this, but one of them is Malaria Consortium. And we recommend Malaria Consortium for their seasonal malaria chemo prevention program. This program distributes preventative anti-malarial medication to children living in areas where malaria is highly seasonal. The idea being, if we can give every child under 5 a preventative dose of anti-malarial medication during the rainy season, when they're most at risk of dying from malaria, they'll be protected for the whole year. I was actually able to, last summer, the summer where it was safe to travel, go to Burkina Faso to see Malaria Consortium's work. And it was really incredible to kind of see all of the community health workers get ready and going out to try and knock on every door in Burkina Faso to see if there was a child under 5 there that needed the preventative anti-malarial medication. It was really great. But GiveWell doesn't recommend Malaria Consortium just because I had a really fun time visiting their program. We recommend them based on evidence of effectiveness. So we've seen 7 very high quality studies showing that this seasonal malaria chemo prevention causes fewer children or fewer cases of malaria in the areas where they work. Additionally, we think that it's very cost effective, saving a life for between $3,000 and $4,000. Now, that might sound high compared to some claims you might hear from other charities, like 50 cents can save a child's life. But this estimate is GiveWell's all-in estimate. It includes costs borne by many different actors, and importantly, adjusts for the fact that not every child who receives a treatment would otherwise have died from malaria. Those other very low estimates are often the equivalent of saying the cost for one treatment. Additionally, as an organization, Malaria Consortium is very transparent and shares information proactively with us, and we think that they'd be able to use additional funding to increase the number of children that they're able to reach and continue to increase their impact. So Malaria Consortium represents one of GiveWell's great top recommended charities, and it passes GiveWell's very high bar for both evidence of effectiveness and cost effectiveness. So we both have a strong sense of kind of what the impact of our work with Malaria Consortium will be, and we know that it's very cheap to save a life. And so GiveWell's right now trying to think a lot about how we can find giving opportunities that might be even more cost effective than what we currently recommend, even if that means kind of lowering our bar for evidence of effectiveness to see if there are opportunities to find more leveraged impact. And one way that we're doing this is through technical assistance. So technical assistance, so direct delivery is what our current recommended charities do. And that's basically GiveWell donor funds are funding all aspects of the process. Malaria Consortium gets funds from GiveWell. They order medication, they transport the medication to the areas where they're working, and then use those same funds to distribute the medication. On the other hand, technical assistance would be GiveWell supporting a charity that would help support a government of a low or lower middle income country to improve the services that that government provides to its constituents. So it's something that could be much more leveraged than what we currently recommend, and so could be more cost effective, but also has a lot more moving pieces, because for direct delivery or for Malaria Consortium, we can see kind of how much money in creates the outcome that we want to see. Whereas that impact is a little bit mediated if we're going through an existing government infrastructure. And so GiveWell's still in the early stages of determining whether technical assistance is something we want to invest a lot in. But I want to tell you about one grant that we made in this space, which I think is really interesting, which was to address the idea of syphilis in pregnancy. So about 1 million pregnant people have active syphilis infections each year, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And if untreated, this syphilis can cause stillbirth in about 30% of cases, and also disability or disfigurement for the child. But it's very treatable with one injection of a 16-cent dose of penicillin. This treatment is recommended by the World Health Organization, but it has limited implementation and not very much philanthropic funds going toward it. This could be because of a lack of awareness of the issue, or because of a focus on HIV in pregnancy that could cause, the exclusion of other STIs. But it's this very focus on HIV in pregnancy that could unlock a lot of impact for addressing syphilis in pregnancy. And that's because there's a new test that's come on the market that, as opposed to just being an HIV test, is a joint HIV and syphilis test. And so GiveWell has partnered with Evidence Action to fund them to help the government of Liberia switch their prenatal HIV testing from HIV-only testing to dual HIV syphilis tests. So Liberia has high rates of pregnant people with syphilis, and it has a strong prenatal testing program. So the idea is that if Evidence Action can help Evidence Action with the relatively low cost of switching the HIV test to these dual tests, which can return results in the same visit and allow the pregnant person to be treated for syphilis during that same visit, there could be a ton of impact to unlock. And Evidence Action could hand this work over to the government after about 5 years, so that kind of the impact keeps happening, but we don't have to be, but kind of we've passed it on to the government. So this is something that seems like it could be really leveraged and really exciting, but it's still an exploratory grant because there might be challenges that we can't predict, and it might just be too difficult to evaluate the impact that Evidence Action had on the government and the impact that government had on the people that it was trying to help. This is still something we're excited about, but not yet kind of ready to recommend to individuals. But we're very excited about what we do have to recommend to individuals, which are kind of the top charities that I was explaining earlier. And to give that a little bit of an explanation about how excited we are to recommend these, is the United States Department of Transportation is in charge of making cost effectiveness analyses and determining how much they can spend on traffic and road safety improvements to avert a traffic death in the United States. They're willing to spend over $9 million to do that. In contrast, we believe GiveWell's top charities can avert a death in a poor country for between $3,000 and $5,000. So this is an incredible impact. If you're interested in joining us to create this impact or learning more, you can reach out to me at olivia@givewell.org. You can go to givewell.org, or I'll be sticking around for questions after all the presentations. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Olivia. That was fantastic. Up next, we're going to be hearing from Diana Cimino. And Diana comes to us as the Senior Donor Relations Manager from the Humane League, which is one of the most effective animal advocacy organizations in the US. So I'm going to turn it over to Diana for the continued part of our presentation.
Thanks, Aaron. Let me just share my screen. Can you see that all right?
Yep, we got it.
Great. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight to learn more about effective altruism. I really appreciate it. My name is Diana Samino, as Aaron mentioned, and I work at the Humane League, which is an international nonprofit whose mission is to end the abuse of animals raised for food. I'm really pleased to be on the call tonight to talk about how animal welfare fits into the wider effective altruism universe. So throughout this talk, I'm going to be utilizing that framework that you heard Arushi talk about earlier, that EAs use to figure out which causes to prioritize and make the case for why you all should try and take action to alleviate the suffering of animals, given that animal suffering is a problem that is massive in scale, that there are interventions that are tractable and can help us solve this problem and make a big impact on improving the lives of many, many animals across the world that are suffering. And also this problem is rather neglected. So before we get to the idea of talking about animals and animal welfare, I want you to think about your own life and reflect on the fact that you have lots of different kinds of experiences. Negative ones, positive ones, neutral ones. I'm sure that your experiences run the gamut. And among these many experiences that you have, I imagine that some of them strike you as more or less desirable. And the same can be said of animals too. It's easy to forget, and many people do, but animals have lived experiences much like we do. For example, Katie the hen is capable of having positive and negative experiences. And among the many experiences that she will have throughout her life, there are some that she's likely to find desirable and to her liking, and others that she will find undesirable and that will frustrate her preferences. If we imagine what would happen to Katie if she lived in the kind of environment that most egg-laying hens around the world are subjected to, that is, a life inside a battery cage, crammed inside a tiny wire cage with 6 other chickens, sores on her feet from standing on wire for all her life, cage bars rubbing her wings raw and ripping the feathers off her body, absolutely destroyed reproductive tract because she's been bred to lay 100 times more eggs than she normally would, we can understand that living in this environment is decidedly negative for Katie because Katie's preferences are regularly frustrated and Katie's conscious experience is unpleasant. For example, she's experiencing a lot of pain and suffering in this battery cage environment. If instead we were to place Katie in a more desirable environment, such as a lush green field, we can imagine that the new experiences that she would have here would do a much better job of satisfying her preferences. I want you to think of these concepts of preference and welfare as being linked. Welfare is states that individuals prefer, and an individual's welfare increases when their preferences are satisfied. And in the reverse, when an individual's preferences are frustrated, their welfare decreases. So farmed animals like Katie are raised by humans to satisfy our economic preferences. We make them pay the cost of satisfying our preferences. Humans optimize animal farming operations to produce food for low cost and high yield of food, no matter what the welfare implications for the animals that are bound up in the system. And as we saw earlier, Katie's life in a barren battery cage clearly spells a terrible existence for her as an individual. But so what? Why should effective altruists care about this? Well, it comes down to that first metric that we look at, scale. At any given time, there are approximately 142 billion vertebrates suffering on farms across the world. I know that number is unfathomable, really, but it's massive. This includes farmed fish, chickens, cows, pigs, among many other animals. And this means that over the course of a year, there are billions and billions of individuals raised for food around the world that are suffering tremendously on farms. However, fortunately for us, there are tractable interventions that activists are pursuing to alleviate and end this suffering. So one intervention I'd like to look at as an example to start are corporate cage-free commitments. From about 2014 to 2016, most major US food companies committed to sourcing only cage-free eggs by about 2026 or sooner. This large-scale institutional shift was the result of a rather small coalition of animal advocacy groups working together to pressure companies to publicly commit to eliminating battery cage eggs from their supply chains. The graph that you see, the visual here on the slide, comes from a report from the Humane League labs, which found that since December 2015, the percentage of egg-laying hens in the US being raised in cage-free systems more than doubled, increasing from 8.6% to 20.7%. And as the timelines for fulfilling these commitments start to come due, the percentage of egg-laying hens like Katie, who will be living in these brutal and inhumane battery cages, will continue to decrease. Today, that number is even higher at around 28%, meaning that over 90 million hens will never have to endure the brutal existence of life inside a battery cage, thanks in large part to these corporate commitments. Another intervention that effective altruists support is innovation in the food industry as a promising way to make it easier for folks to avoid animal products. So what this can look like, for example, is investing in the development and marketing of plant-based alternatives to animal products. In recent years, there's really been a proliferation of plant-based products coming to market, and many restaurants, including large franchises, have recently begun serving vegetarian and vegan options, adding them to their menus, that is. In this picture, for example, you see the Impossible Whopper, which debuted in 2019. Big fast food chain Burger King used this vegan plant-based meat alternative from Impossible Foods to add this plant-based option to their menu. And in many cases, restaurants might otherwise only serve animal products or have no plant-based options whatsoever if it weren't for big companies like this adding these plant-based options. So this is another really exciting area where we see a lot of progress being made. I want to jump back a second and address the suffering of wild animals, because my section is called Animal Welfare. So this is effective altruists don't just care about farmed animals, they also care about the suffering of wild animals. And I want to take a moment to talk to you about that. If we widen the scope of animal welfare to encompass the trillions and trillions of wild animals out there, we get a much larger group of sentient individuals out there in the world who are experiencing a wide range of negative experiences and collectively a massive amount of suffering. While these individuals may not suffer as directly at the hands of humans in the ways that farmed animals do, although with global climate change and other anthropogenic phenomena impacting nearly all wild animals, they still suffer nonetheless. A quick note here, there are some, in my opinion, outdated notions of animal welfare that would maintain that if an animal experiences a natural life, then its life is necessarily good. But as effective altruists, we should recognize that there's great potential for animals to suffer regardless of the cause. After an earthquake, for example, I think no reasonable human goes, well, that's just Mother Nature running her course. No need to help those people suffering in the aftermath of that natural disaster. Or we shouldn't bother alleviating their suffering because this is just the natural order of things. So that said, I believe we have to also consider wild animals, including individuals who suffer from natural causes, as the subjects of our altruism. You can imagine that certain parasites run rampant in the wild and cause a great deal of suffering to the individuals they infect. You can also imagine that many animals starve to death or live in constant terror of being predated. And the suffering matters and is worthy of our attention too. I just want to make a quick note here. I'd say, from my perspective, wild animal welfare is really just getting started. We're just beginning to understand the ways that we can help wild animals. But we have to imagine that given how neglected this particular cause area is, there's a pretty low bar to cross here because there are very few people and very few resources going towards solving this problem. And there's a lot right now to be gained from conducting research to even just identify which interventions may be tractable in reducing wild animal suffering. So this diagram is so good, you had to see it twice. As you saw when Arushi showed this earlier, this diagram from animal charity evaluators, I think, gives a pretty compelling case for the neglectedness of farmed animals in this space. So on the left side, you see the number of animals used and killed by humans. Farm animals, 99% of the animals that fit into this category. And then if you look on the right to the money donated to animal charities, most of the money going to help animals, and it's not that much out of the total philanthropy going to help humans and animals and the environment total, a very, very small percentage of that is going to farmed animals. Just about 1% of the total philanthropy going to help farmed animals and the environment, which is maybe about 3% of total philanthropic funding overall, is going to help farmed animals. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, the money and people dedicated to working on improving the welfare of wild animals is even more neglected. So in summary, there are tens of billions of animals that suffer and are slaughtered in factory farms annually, and orders of magnitude more animals suffer in the wild. There are tractable interventions that we can pursue to alleviate their suffering, or there are good opportunities for research to determine what interventions may be tractable, for instance, for reducing the suffering of wild animals. And there's barely anyone doing anything about it. There are very few resources being devoted to this particular cause area. So all of these things together, I think, make this a very compelling area for EAs to care about and to prioritize. And I will leave you with this final slide to say, if you want to learn more, there are lots of great EA resources online where you can educate yourself. If you're already convinced that this matters, I highly recommend donating to EA-aligned charities working on animal welfare, or volunteering, or looking to do direct work for an EA-aligned charity doing work in this area. You may also want to reduce your own personal animal product consumption. But really, because we are running out of time here, if you have any questions, want tips or recommendations, or want to discuss anything at all, please feel free to reach out to me over email or send me a DM here. I'd love to connect with you. And I really appreciate your time and for being here on this call. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you so much. So our final speaker is joining us all the way from England, where he is finishing up his PhD in philosophy from NYU, and he's working as a researcher for the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford, which is dedicated to safeguarding our long-term survival as a species. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Rob Long.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me, and it's good to see some old faces and some new faces. So what is long-termism, which is what I'm speaking about today? So long-termism is not a cause area per se, but rather a philosophical framework for evaluating cause areas. Long-termism, in short, is the view that when we're choosing what causes to work on, we should be particularly concerned with future generations and want to make things better, not just for the present, but for centuries and possibly millennia to come. So some examples of causes that a long-termist perspective might favor are working to prevent human extinction from risks like climate change, nuclear war, pandemics, or AI, or working to make the future better, conditional on human survival, for example, by improving institutions or civilizational values. And I just wanted to briefly give some examples of people in New York City EA or alumni like me who work on long-termist causes. So we have people doing work in AI safety, technical research to make sure that AI is safe and beneficial. It's Ethan Perez and Claudia Shi and Victor Veitch. We also have Seth Baum and the Global Catastrophic Risk Institute right here in New York City, which works on a variety of global catastrophic risks. And in England with me, we have Luisa Rodriguez, who's done research on nuclear war and civilizational collapse. Arden Kaler is now at 80,000 hours researching careers for improving the long-term future. And there's me and Daniel F. at the Future of Humanity Institute. And by the way, that's a non-existent list. So if it's just people who popped into my head and I know. So if you're not on that list, it's not because I don't think your work is really cool. So why would we think that our possible influence on the long-term future is something that we should care about and something that we should be working on, like me and all these people are? I think to make the case for a long-termist perspective, there are three things you need in place. You need to think that the future matters. You need to think that the future is big. And you have to think that there are ways that we can meaningfully make the future better. So I just wanted to discuss each of these claims and why you might hold them briefly. So what about this first claim that the future is big? So more precisely, this is the claim that the future of civilization is, in expectation, vast. It could last for a very long, long time, and there could be a lot of people and or other sentient beings in it. So there's a tendency for people throughout history to think that they're living at the end of history. Even if you're not a particularly gloomy person, and I know there's a lot of reason to feel gloomy on today, it often just seems like civilization advanced towards this point and there's just not that much after us. Maybe we're about to blow ourselves up or Jesus is about to return. But if we last as long as the typical mammalian species, we could still have 200,000 years to go. And that's a conservative estimate. If we manage not to blow ourselves up, we have perhaps 1 billion years of habitable Earth to work with. And that's just a lot of time for our descendants to do things and a lot of possible descendants. And even more speculatively, if you think there's even just a tiny chance of our civilization surviving and progressing enough to settle in space, there could just be a very, very large future ahead of us in expectations. So all of that, again, is speculative, but you just have to think there's at least some chance of a very long future. And to deny that, you'd have to think that there's some like law, ironclad law of certain destruction ahead of us. So that's the case for thinking that in terms of scale, the long-term future could potentially be enormous. The other claim is you have to think that the future matters. So that's just saying that we shouldn't discount the welfare of people or other sentient creatures just because they're in the future. So suppose that you litter a glass bottle in a remote mountain stream. It's just as bad, I think, if that bottle makes someone cut their feet in 10 years as if it makes someone cut their feet in 150 years. The pain is going to be just as bad, and I think you did something every bit as wrong if it happens in 150 years as in 10 years. And this is related to that expanding moral circle that Arushi talked about. EAs work on global poverty because they realize that space is irrelevant. Just because someone is far away from you in space doesn't mean that their suffering doesn't count. And EAs work on animal welfare because they realize that just because something doesn't look like you or sound like you, their pain can matter every bit as much as ours can. Long-termists argue that just because some being is far from us in time doesn't mean that we can fail to take their welfare into account and fail to consider their interests when we're making decisions. Okay, so from these premises that the future is big and that it matters, it follows that whatever you care about, there's just going to be a lot of it in the future. If you care about pleasure and pain, beauty and achievement, knowledge, the scale of that in the future is vast. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, that's fair enough, but it's just not really clear what that is going to have to do with what I should do. Speaking for myself, it's very hard for me to make plans for 1 year from now. So the thought might be, how exactly are we supposed to help people in the year 10,000 or 10 million? And it's true that our actions with respect to the long-term future can often be much more speculative and uncertain than actions like, for example, saving a drowning child. So we just have to think that there are ways that we can meaningfully affect the welfare of future generations. Well, long-termers think that there are very plausible interventions that we could make that have some chance of making the future much better. So one very straightforward thing you can do is just try to preserve the future, make it possible for it to happen in the first place. So this is often known as trying to mitigate existential risks, which are outcomes where an adverse event could either annihilate intelligent life on Earth or permanently and drastically curtail its potential. So we already mentioned some of these. One potential existential risk would be a global pandemic. We've seen how bad this one is, but if one was more deadly, that could potentially cause the collapse of civilization. Or climate change. If we had runaway climate change that could render the Earth completely uninhabitable, would be another X risk. And something that I've worked on and thought about are risks from artificial intelligence that could be powerful but not well aligned with human values. So that's preserving the future. You could also try to improve the future. Let's make the future good if we survive into it. After all, it's not worth preserving the future unless there will be good things in it. So ways that you could try to make the future good would include trying to improve institutions that might last far into the future, or improve civilizational values by, for example, making people more altruistic or expanding their sphere of moral concern, which, if done in the right way, might have long-run effects into the future. Another thing you can do is, if you feel like all of these things are too speculative, or we just don't quite yet know what we can do to influence the long-term future, is do more research to get more information on how we might possibly do this. And that's something that a lot of EAs are doing now. You could also even think that we're not even in a position to research this. And there's a strand of long-termism called patient long-termism, which says maybe we should just save our money and save our resources and wait until we have more information and capacity to act. So between all of those things, EAs with a long-termist perspective think there are definitely things we can do that, in expectation, will make the long-term future better, whether that's trying to preserve it, improve it, gather more information, or just save time, money, and resources. So I'm going to briefly mention some organizations that work on things like this before closing with a quote. So yeah, as Diana was saying, please get in touch with me if you have any questions about long-termist flavored work in EA. There are happily a lot of organizations in this space, and new ones every day, but ones you could look up are my own, the Future of Humanity Institute. There's also the Global Priorities Institute, the Open Philanthropy Project, which is somewhat related to GiveWell, works on a lot of long-termist things. And as I mentioned, there's the Global Catastrophic Risk Institute in New York City. So yeah, as I said, I'd like to just close with a quote from the late moral philosopher Derek Parfit. So in On What Matters, Volume 3, he writes, "Life can be wonderful as well as terrible, and we shall increasingly have the power to make life good. Since human history may only just be beginning, we can expect that future humans or suprahumans may achieve some goods that we cannot now even imagine. In Nietzsche's words, there has never been such a new dawn and clear horizon and such an open sea. If we are the only rational beings in the universe, as some recent evidence suggests, it matters even more whether we shall have descendants or successors during the billions of years in which that would be possible. Some of our successors might live lives and create worlds that, though failing to justify past suffering, would have given us all, including those who suffered the most, reasons to be glad that the universe exists." Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rob. That's a very dramatic way to introduce a quote, with the long pull from the mug. I'm going to do that in future talks. It really makes you lean in. Oh, what is he going to tell us? So before we close, I'd like to hand things back to Arushi, who's going to tell us about how we can all become more involved in effective altruism broadly, and specifically with EA NYC. So Arushi, you want to pop your screen back on the Zooms? And you're muted, Arushi, if you're talking. I'm not sure if you are.
Yeah, sorry. Are you all able to see?
Yeah, we can see it.
All right. So yeah, thank you all so much to our guest speakers for all those lovely talks about these different cause areas. And I'll just close with a little bit about how you can get involved with effective altruism. So one of the most important decisions that we can make with our lives is how we're going to spend the approximately 80,000 hours of our working lives. So the organization 80,000 Hours offers great career recommendations based on research about which careers can have the largest positive social impact. So you can check out their website. The link here is particularly their career planning article, which they released recently, which is a really great piece on like helping you plan your career. And you can also check out our career planning page on our website, where we link to 80,000 Hours, but a lot of other resources as well. And we also have a job board of high impact jobs in the New York area and beyond. Other things you can do, you can talk with your friends and family about EA and get them interested and involved. Donations to high impact charities and organizations is one of the best ways to make an impact. regardless of how you're making your money, you can always make an impact with that money. So a great organization here is Giving What We Can. They have a giving pledge, which has been a really amazing thing in my life, and I think in many other EA's lives. And you can also just learn more about EA through books like Doing Good Better, The Life You Can Save, and Effective Altruism, the website effectivealtruism.org. And lastly, you can get involved with your local EA group, which is us, EA NYC. So we have a bunch of ways to kind of get involved. We have a Facebook group, we have a Slack, we have regular events like this. We've got a newsletter and lots of other things. So the best way to kind of keep in touch with what we're doing is probably to join our newsletter and our Facebook group. And you can see like a lot about what we're doing at effectivealtruism.nyc. That's our website. And I've also put Erin and my email at the bottom if you want to reach us, reach out to us. We're also happy to do one-on-one chats to talk about anything if you're interested in learning more about EA, talking about your career, talking about donations. And yeah, that's it. I'm gonna send a whole bunch of links right now in the chat, all these things, so you don't have to copy them off the slides, along with all the speakers' contact info. So that should be in the chat now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arushi. And I'm going to stop recording now. So bye to those who are watching at home. We love you. See you soon.